Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. So, my name's Stanley. So I'm the founder of The Attention Seeker. Before we start, has anyone watched our TikToks or any of our stuff online? Has anyone seen it? Got a couple people there? Okay, cool. That's good. There's a couple. So I'm going to share some of that a bit later on, which will be good, so you can understand who we are. But The Attention Seeker is a creative agency at the heart of it, right? We make content for people. And we've got this big thing on, we don't want to be the painter with the worst painted house, right? So the idea is that like a lot of professionals go into practice and they sell people a service, yet they don't do it themselves, you know? And so we have this big belief that we need to be the best at what we sell before we sell it to someone else. And which leads into today's conversation around, influence and content and brand and what we're going to talk about in advertising. We tend to think that we can do it somewhat well before we sell it ourselves. So we started on LinkedIn as our first and primary platform that we work on. And yes, people do put up content on LinkedIn and it does go well for those of you who aren't there. We have about 14,000 or so followers on LinkedIn under my profile and a few thousand everywhere else. And that drives most of the business to our business. Like 70 to 80% of our business comes through there, which is contradicted or contrasted maybe with TikTok. So our TikTok has about 600,000 followers, so it's a little bit bigger, and it gets about 10 million views a month, but only sort of generates 20 to 30% of our business. And when we say that, it's generation in number of clients as opposed to value, because some of the clients that we get through TikTok are huge compared to the personal branding clients we have on LinkedIn, but in terms of lead generation, business owners on LinkedIn is where it all comes. Yeah? So that's a little bit background of what we do, and all those things that we do ourselves, we sell to other people, right? So we help other people create their LinkedIn and make that better, and we also help people with their TikTok, social media, whatever it is, making short form video. Does that make sense? Any questions on any of that? No? Okay, so the second thing I want to ask is, for the group at large, who's our class clowns? Do we have class clowns? Does everyone know what a class clown is? Who's the class clown? Put your hand up or point to the person who is. The people who make the most noise or disrupt the class. Is there anyone in this room? No? You got no one. You got to shake your head. No one's there. So I think it might be you then. Is there anyone? This guy. Yeah, I thought it might be him. He keeps nodding his head as well. I was looking at these two. Okay, so you two, what's your name? Brian. Yeah. And your name? Dipali. Dipali and Brian. So as nominated class clowns, my job today is to get you two, to get everyone to start talking with me so that everyone else feels comfortable to start talking, right? So you're going to help us start the conversations, and then everyone else jump in as you hear these conversations going, call these people out if they're saying stuff that's full of it, all right? That's the goal. So to start with, these are going to be all out of whack now that I realize that I'm not using my iPad, so the fonts are out. But anyway, we're going to go through a history of advertising. That's what that says. You can't see the whole thing. And there's a point to this, is that when you think about influencers and stuff, it's just a natural evolution of where we've come from in advertising. And same with short form content and making branded content. So when you think like pre-1950s, when you wanted to sell something to somebody, they'd go to the market, right? They'd go to your stall and you'd have this beanie that your mum knitted you, and you'd be able to ask them and have a conversation that, hey, I want to buy that beanie. Can you tell me about it? And you can talk about the wool and you can talk about all those sorts of things, right? And you can have a conversation with this person and get to know them, and you'd believe them and you'd buy it. But also, you knew them because you bought everything locally. Everything was just down the road. You knew all your local producers for stuff, right? Pre-1950s. Then we get into the 1950s, and you had the World War II boom, right? So after World War II, for most of the Western society at least, but also the world at large, the Industrial Revolution had fully kicked off. Factories, everything was in process. It was more about production for demand. So can I make enough stuff for the people who want it, right? And that's how the world worked at that point in time. It was not necessarily like mine's the best. It was more about I have some of what you need. I can produce enough of it, and we're just trying to sell a lot. As we get into the 1960s, things started to shift slightly, where it was more a sales-orientated sort of marketing. So this is where, I guess, the birth of advertising as we know it started, right? This is where like posters and things came up, newspaper ads. You know, this is the old Colgate, is it Colgate? The toothpaste thing where Minty Fresh, right? That's where that sort of stuff started. And in those worlds, you had to be able to pitch your product in a static image really fast. That's where slogans and taglines came about to be able to say why you should buy our things, right? But as a consumer, you had no more information. You just had whatever the poster said, and that's how you made your decision. And then you went down to the local supermarket and you bought the thing because you were told they gave you Minty Fresh breath, right? So that's the 1960s. And then in the 1970s, that marketing worked really well. Like the Mad Men era, right? Like it worked really well coming out of that. And lots of people made lots of money. But wherever money goes, more people jump on board, right? So then we now had a place where there was filled with advertisers. And so now is a competition on who could put out the most stuff or the best stuff. But then they got a bit more segmented. So they started to invent market segmentation, right? So I'm only going to talk to men over the age of 40 or kids at this age and things like that, right? So they started to break out the market to make specific posters, not just on Minty Fresh breath, but if you want to kiss your loved one, you need to make sure you've got nice Minty Fresh breath as a man, right? So market segmentation marketing. And look, these numbers there's some crossover, right? The world doesn't just fall into nice tens of numbers. That's not how it works, but roughly where we sat. In the 1980s, so as brands increased their advertising, they had to start developing unique selling propositions. So why is my toothpaste different to everyone else's? What can it do more than anyone else, or what can they not do, right? So you had unique selling points. We've all heard of that, right? Unique selling propositions. It still gets touted a lot these days as something that you should do. So you couldn't just provide a utility and tell everyone that you did it. You had to have a reason why your product was better than everyone else's, not just target a segment or target the world. And then in the 1990s, this is where the, I guess, environmental orientation started. So like, you know, that's where stuff started to happen around, like, at that time we called it global warming, not climate change, right? You had things around slave labor and human rights stuff, and economic and geopolitical things were coming out, like who do we buy from? Where's the stuff getting made? So all those started to jump into the advertising world, and so now we've got some more information as a consumer about the product we're buying. And so you can see as time goes on, all that's happening as advertisers happening is we're getting a little bit more information from the people who are selling us stuff so we can make up a decision as to why to buy theirs. Does that make sense? Yep. So now we know a bit more about environmental reasons, right? So things like ecological, political, technological, or social changes. Yep. And then we hit the 2000s. And what happened in the 2000s? What happened in the world roughly like late 90s, 2000s? What was the big change in the world? Who here's born in the 2000s? Maybe too young to even know. What happened in that time period when you were born? What is it famous for in the changeover? It's like these days you just take it for granted like it's everywhere, but when you don't have it, you lose your mind.
Creation of
Internet. Yeah, the internet. The internet was born around these days. Well, when we say the internet, it was way before this, but it became popular. Like it was widespread. The World Wide Web was everywhere. The dot-com bubble had happened, or was happening. And so what happens with the internet? It speeds everything up and it starts to offer even more knowledge, right? And there started to be people who can make blog websites and talk about why Nike's so bad for its slave labor, or, you know, or people hurting the environments and stuff. So now we're getting even more information thrown at us. And as consumers, we can start to, we're finally starting to get messages about brands and about products that in a large quantity that's not from the brand, right? It's not from them. It's from another external source telling us stuff and reasons why we should or shouldn't buy things at scale. It was happening before, but at scale of internet, you can touch everyone really fast, right? Make sense? And then something towards the end of this decade started to happen in earnest, and that was pay-per-click, right? So the pay-per-click model that Google and Facebook adopted and all this sort of stuff, that's that started to turn on really fast towards the end of this decade. And so that brings us to 2010s. And this was the decade of performance marketing, right? Where I could, as a company, start to not even really worry about what information you had about me. I could just go, if I put $1 here, $3 is going to come out here. So I'm going to put $1 billion there. And $3 billion is going to come out here. And in those early days of performance marketing and pay-per-click and stuff, that's really how it was. Like, it was this arbitrage of like, I'll put heaps of money in there and I'll get heaps of money out this side in terms of revenue and sales. And it was new, right? Like, we didn't know this. Social media was new. Consumers didn't understand it. We were getting fed stuff by an algorithm and had no understanding of what it was doing to us. And we were just buying whatever it gave us, right? We're just buying things because it told us to buy them, and we were bombarded with it. There was still lots of information, and there was still all the same things that we've been building up, and there's still heaps of information. But the pay-per-click model hijacked us for about a decade. Just hijacked consumers really badly. But then we bought into 2020s, and what happened in 2020? You shouldn't have forgotten that just yet. COVID, right? So the pandemic hit. And what did the pandemic do for most of the world? What it did for most people? What happened to us? Lockdown, stay at home. And then when we're staying at home and we couldn't get out and do stuff, what did all the advertisers do? They just bombarded us with ads constantly. How many people were selling online courses from 2020 to 2023, right? Like, every man and his dog was selling a course, you know? Everyone was. I tried so hard to fight my urge to be one of those guys to sell a course. I was like, man, I should do a course. Like, everyone's doing a course. I should do it. And I had to like fight everything in my body to go, I can't just be another Tai Lopez. Like, I can't just do another course. But it is what happened, right? We all know that. We saw it. We got bombarded with these pay-per-click ads. And it makes sense. Performance marketing worked. Why not? But as time went on and the decade went on, and as we get into 2023 especially, you're starting to see